Good afternoon and welcome to Seth Derner, legislative candidate from District 21. Thank you, Seth, for joining us for our virtual legislative candidate meetings. My name is Gina Ragland, and joining me today is Susan DeCamp, volunteer state president, and advocacy lead volunteers Joyce Beck and Bob Lassen. We also have Donna Bowles with us, an AARP volunteer and District 21 constituent, joining us this afternoon as well. Raise your hand, Donna. Seth, we appreciate your taking the time to meet and discuss issues of importance to the 50-plus voter and their families in Nebraska. Again, as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared with AARP members across your district prior to the election. So to jump right in and start us off, Seth, if you want to give us maybe a little bit of background about yourself and your campaign, and with a goal of 5 minutes or less, that would be great. Yeah, and then once we've completed that opening, we'll move into the questions. So I'll pass it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Gina. And thanks everyone else for being on the call and for those who are watching this later. So, well, by means of a quick biography, I grew up on a ranch, family ranch up in Wheeler County. In fact, my parents are still up there. We just celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary at the end of June. So feel very blessed to have that as part of our family history and continue to have that as part of our family legacy. So I came down here to the University of Nebraska for college, and then I went back and I was a teacher to start my career. I taught ag and shop classes up at Elgin Public Schools in Antelope County. Did that for 4 years, and then I was recruited for a job out in Indiana, and then I went out to Washington State for a while, met my wife there, and after we got married, convinced her to come back and live the good life here in Nebraska. She was a little leery. She told me the two things she didn't love was humidity and wind. So I kind of fibbed to her a little bit about how much humidity and wind we have here, but but she fell in love with the people, which is kind of what I expected. And we have made Lincoln our home ever since. We moved out to a development called Fallbrook, which is up on the northwest side of the city. We've now been out here 17 years. We've had a couple of boys. All of our friends were involved in the community. We've helped start a church. I help run the farmers market here in the community. So yeah, Lincoln has become our home, and we feel very grateful for the decision to come back to Nebraska and make it our home for our family. And professionally, after we moved back to Nebraska, I helped start a company with one of my colleagues that I'd met when working in Indiana. When I started teaching, I taught in a school that had distance learning classrooms. This was late 1990s, first set of 14 schools that were tied together. And so I had experience in using technology to help people learn via distance, which, was pretty novel. So then in the early 2000s, when I moved back to Lincoln, a few folks had asked me if I would help them consult with them because their companies were starting to use some distance learning to do some training, and did a couple of projects on the side, and then just kept getting more requests. And after you do things a little bit, you become an expert. And so it was a kind of a right place, right time. And so Doug, who was my colleague in Indiana, we started the company thinking, oh, well, this will be something fun we can do for a few years, help some companies figure out how to do e-learning and distance learning, and mostly in the ag and food production space. And then it was just kind of a stroke of fate that it was kind of the right time, right place. A lot of organizations were trying to use technology to figure out how to connect people. And now we are 18 years later. We've got 55 employees all over the country. We have clients all over the world. We've helped countless organizations train millions of people to help them be better at their jobs or help customers learn how to use products. So yeah, we feel very fortunate to have built a great team. And yeah, in terms of getting into the race, I grew up in a very small town. Bartlett has, I think, about 111 people in it now. And, you would go to like the church potluck, which meant you would not only cook for it, you'd participate, and then you'd clean up, you'd put chairs away, you'd vacuum. Like, you were just part of the community. Like you served each other. That's what you did. And I think that ethos has kind of just deeply woven into me. And so I feel very fortunate to have the opportunities that we've had as a family and as a business, starting a business, and, been looking for ways to give back. And it felt like just the kind of the climate in this state of division and people, I when I grew up here, I remember, going to the state legislature and being very proud of our unicameral and the fact that our senators worked together hand in hand. Didn't always see eye to eye, but it was they worked together to solve problems for Nebraskans. And I'd love to see that return. I'd love to see that spirit of cooperation, that spirit of focusing on solutions. And so felt like this was an opportunity for me to bring some of my lived experience and skills to hopefully serve the folks in District 21 and at large, hopefully all Nebraskans. So yeah, hopefully that gives you enough background to get started.
It's wonderful, Seth. And there are many people around this table this morning or this afternoon that have connections to close to back home, Atkinson, Elgin, Ainsworth. So we appreciate and love that country spirit that you have. So we're going to move on now to our question side of things. And we did prior to this provide you with a set of 3 questions pertaining to the 50 plus in Nebraska. We're looking to allot 5 minutes for each question. They are jam-packed and we probably won't have time to cover everything, but we're looking for, what your thoughts are on the surface of where these issues are at. So to begin with question 1, it's on health, caregiving, and home and community-based care. Joyce Beck is going to take that. So go ahead, Joyce.
Thank you, Seth, for your time. We know you have a busy schedule, and I appreciate the fact you took some time for us. So 84% of Nebraskans over 45 say that staying at home as they get older is extremely important to them. Home and community-based services, as well as area agency on aging, become important assets to caregivers as they take care of their loved ones. Home care not only meets the needs of the loved ones, but it also provides relief to an already strained long-term care industry. So here's my questions for you, Seth. What would you do to protect and/or expand the home and community-based programs, particularly recruitment and retention of a significant workforce and adequate funding for the programs and services that older Nebraskans and their families rely on? And secondly, what would you do to support the 179,000 unpaid family caregivers in Nebraska?
Yeah, these are great questions. And this is very personal to me right now. Both my parents are in their 80s, and I also have an aunt who never married, who's kind of like my second mom, and she had health issues, and she was fortunate to have long-term care insurance that she can move into an assisted living nearby. So she is, we feel very fortunate about that, but that's not the case for a lot of Nebraskans to have that safety net. So having access to home care, and you're right, being able to stay in the home is, I think, paramount. And I think a lot of data would show that the outcomes are best when people can stay in their homes as long as possible. So there's a few things that are important to that. One is workforce. We've just got to have providers first and foremost. We've got to have the talent who are both willing and trained to be able to do the work of home health care. And so part of that is I am as an old educator, an old teacher, especially one who was a career tech teacher, making sure that we give opportunities for young people, even down at the second high school level, to understand what the career opportunities are in the field, and as possible, be able to provide, health sciences programs at the secondary level so they can start to get the skills needed so that they could quickly plug into a career pathway, whether it's training through an employer or through a post-secondary institution to go out and do that work. The more providers that we have, the less opportunity we have for, care deserts, which there are parts of the state where there just aren't even providers if people wanted home health as an option. But even in our urban areas, there's still, the access to the services themselves. So first is workforce. The second of all is looking at reimbursement rates. And from at least from the public side, where Medicaid or Medicare is involved, and where the state, especially on the Medicaid side, the reimbursement rates, making sure that those rates stay up with the actual cost of providing the service first and foremost. Like, no agency or court, no one can provide those things and lose money on the services. Like, it has to be able to pay for itself. And so we've got to make sure the reimbursement rates where public funding is involved stays up with that and can make it viable for organizations who can provide those services. And that's, I think most Nebraskans agree with that. I think Nebraskans, they recognize how important it is that people, get to stay in their homes and have their basic needs taken care of. And we're not talking about, these are not luxury items. This is, basically taking care of our neighbors, having a system in place that helps us be able to do that. So, and then for those who are, taking care of folks, I think we saw some things in the last session, which provided some benefits. I think continuing to build on that momentum and look at whether it's tax credits or other kinds of ways that we can use policy levers to continue to make it financially viable for family members who are giving of their time and energy and talents to be care providers. I think that's important for the state to kind of use all the tools we have in the toolbox to make that as viable as possible. Again, no one's getting rich by taking care of folks in this situation, but if we can make it viable so people can do it, at least from the system perspective, that's a far better deal for the state of Nebraska to have, caring loved ones who are deeply committed to the success of successful outcomes of folks in their homes. If we can make it possible for them to do it, as opposed to, trying to overburden a healthcare system and a long-term care system, like I think that in the long run, that's the smart thing for us to do. So, I think we just need to build on some of the ideas that have been brought forth and continue to just find ways to make that feasible for folks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Seth. And we are pleased. The caregiver tax credit that you're referencing, that was one of AARP's bills. So we were absolutely thrilled to see that move forward. So appreciate your thoughts on that. Moving on to the second question is consumer fraud, exploitation, and protections. And Susan DeCamp is going to take that. So go ahead, Susan. Susan, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon, Seth. So happy to have you here with us. I do have to say I am one of those who is familiar with your territory. I grew up in Antelope County, Neely, Orchard, familiar with Elgin. Also had a lot of trips to Wheeler County, to Bartlett. And that Herb Minery statue collection is amazing. Everyone should go to that little tiny town just to see that artwork. So anyway, thanks for being with us.
Herb is my cousin. My mom was a Minery. So
really?
yes, so
awesome.
it's
Very talented.
fun to see his artwork now on display at home. So
oh, that's awesome. Okay, so scammers are increasingly targeting older adults with scams like wire transfers, gift card scams, and schemes involving real estate property. Nationwide, the average victim of elder fraud lost nearly $34,000 due to these crimes in 2023. And in Nebraska, the FTC showed that there were 4,643 fraud reports made in 2023. Nearly 9 in 10 consumers agree that lawmakers need to do more to protect consumers from fraud and scams. So with that in mind, our question for you is, consumers lose billions of dollars each year to online, financial, property, and other types of fraud. What will you do to address and ensure that Nebraskans are protected against fraud and deceptive or unfair business practices, and provide opportunities for redress to victims of fraud? Would you support enacting laws to require merchants that sell gift cards to post notices about fraud? Enactment of a consumer fraud restitution fund, or implementation of preventative or corrective measures to assist in combating owner-seller housing impersonation fraud?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is both personal and recent. I think I mentioned an aunt that I helped take care of, and she was nearly a victim just last week of someone trying to commit wire fraud. Had got her very worked up and was convinced she needed to go to her bank to withdraw funds. And finally, my wife just kept pushing and pushing to understand what was this about. And we discovered, that someone was portraying, that she had overpaid, and anyway, you guys know the scams. So, and it's unfortunate because she's a very smart woman. She's had a very successful professional career. This is not someone who you feel like you could just pull something over on. But, in the world we live in today, it's complicated, it's complex, and there are things that, and people try to do the right thing if they feel like they've overpaid, or most Nebraskans want to do the right thing and make up for something. And so it's kind of sickening that they take advantage of people's good nature of trying to do the right thing by scamming them. So in terms of specific policies, that I think whatever we can do, whether it's increasing punishment if that's needed to help as a deterrent, I would certainly be in favor of that, and continuing to encourage the Attorney General to go after as vigorously as possible any entity who engages in this behavior, and to seek restitution to the maximum degree possible. The idea of a fund to help folks who have been taken advantage of would certainly be in support of that. Obviously the details of that would have to be figured out, but often folks, this may be their life savings or a good chunk of their life savings, and they're at a point in life where they can't earn it back. They're not going to be back in the workforce the next 20 years to rebuild a nest egg. So I think we have to really think about how do we help folks who have been taken advantage of. And then in terms of, certainly, my sister-in-law works at a bank, and she described a situation they had there as we were talking about our family's situation, where they had an older resident come in and ask to withdraw a bunch of money, and the teller, it was all the signs, and finally convinced the customer to go meet with the bank manager, and the bank manager finally got her to confide what was going on, and she was scared. And and I think most institutions recognize the need to be on the lookout, but and it's one of those where in terms of how do we compel or encourage more retailers, more banks to train their people to be aware of, to be proactive. Even we talked about like long-term care providers. How do we ask them to be proactive, to train and encourage, and create an environment where if they see something, they say something. It makes it easy for them to be able to call on somebody to come in and hopefully intervene before something bad happens. So I would probably start more with incentives to encourage retailers, banks, or those kinds of organizations to provide training, to put in policies, to put practices in place to help prevent it. If we continue to see folks that are kind of the weak link in the chain of protecting folks, then I would say, well, let's talk about what kind of, if we need to have regulations or some sort of rules in place. But let's start with incentivizing and trying to get folks to be good partners in this work.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Seth. Moving on to question 3, helping people stay in their homes and communities. Bob Lassen's going to take that. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, a couple things. First of all, I think your expertise is sorely needed in the legislature. I can't think of anybody else that is in the legislature currently who would have the background you have, and particularly, with the IT and AI and everything else developing right now, that in itself should get you elected. And secondly, you made a good point about the long-term care, and then that set me thinking that assisted living would be a good target for even us to give fraud presentations to, because then you have kind of a captive audience that certainly would be susceptible to this sort of a problem. Okay, now to my question. AARP's goal is to allow people to age in place and stay in the lowest level of care and cost as long as possible. To that issue, I have a couple things that I want to address, and one of them is housing, and the other one is the burden of property tax for individuals. Housing obstacles allow single I'm going to start over. Zoning obstacles allow just single family residential homes. That's what happens in most cities. In these communities, zoning does not include other housing types, such as accessory dwelling units, which is ADUs, manufactured homes, intergenerational duplexes, or apartment buildings that may be a better option for people. On the property tax side, we don't have to talk too much about property tax for regular people, but to somebody that's on a limited income and older residents, it's a real problem. We do have one program that is a value to these people, and that's the homestead exemption. We'll talk about that in a minute. And now to my question. Nebraska has over 65 are the fastest growing segment of our population, and research shows that most want to remain in their homes and communities as they age. As housing costs continue to increase, older adults are unavailable and unable to find housing to meet their needs when they seek to downsize. And thus, they're being pushed out of the communities and the homes that they lived in for generations. What will you do to support, incentivize, and ensure the creation of affordable and diverse housing options, such as accessory dwelling units, intergenerational housing, manufactured housing units, and townhomes? And the second part of the question is, will you fight to ensure that the homestead exemption program is maintained and protected to ensure that older Nebraskans that qualify continue to have access to the tax relief program that allows them to age in place?
Yeah, you bet. Great questions, Bob. Boy, they left the heavy ones for the end. So, well, let me start on the affordable housing, and I may also offer. I think there's a component of affordable transportation as well to that question, Bob. Sometimes it's also not a factor just of housing, but it's can they get to where they need to go from where they live? And for some of our older Nebraskans, because of of their abilities or even costs, how do we I think we also need to push on the idea of making sure that every Nebraskan has access to transportation to be able to get to where they need to go to be, to continue to live independently as well. So on the housing side, I think I mentioned my wife grew up in Washington State. She has a lot of family around Portland area, and that area for a long time now has been kind of a leader in these the accessory dwelling units, the ADUs. And I just think it's phenomenal. We tried to actually, in our own neighborhood a few years ago, we wanted to do some remodeling, and we tried to do a mother-in-law quarters addition to our house. And between our developer and the city, like it became too much of a rigmarole. But it was, and I would certainly be a champion for figuring out how to work with cities and communities to help alleviate whatever concerns they have about that. And the reality is, I think right now we're in a time and place where we should be much more open-minded about it, given our shortage of housing inventory, because the likelihood of like the city of Lincoln adding 10,000 more housing units on new single family housing units on new land, because of the cost of things right now, is low. But if we can take existing properties and have accessory dwelling units, and we can increase inventory by 10,000 units on existing, properties, and we do it in a way that, families can take care of family members, and it still allows older Nebraskans to live independently next to a family. Like, to me, that is the best of both worlds. It helps It helps with our affordable housing inventory. It helps quality of life. And I just know with my own kids, I've got an 8 and 13-year-old, them hanging around, grandparents and great aunts and uncles, like there's something about that collective wisdom that comes with multi-generational families that I think, I think is much more difficult to accomplish in today's age. So certainly a fan of affordable housing and looking at other options, housing types. I think, being more innovative, more thoughtful about how do we have something other than the traditional, 3-bath or 3-bed, 2-bathroom on a, quarter acre of ground. What are other kinds of housing that we can create that is feasible for our older Nebraskans? So definitely would be a fan of that. In terms of the property taxes, homestead exemption, I'm so thankful we have it. It's not keeping up with the cost of inflation. We need to look at the homestead exemption and make sure that it continues to serve its purpose. I'd be a fan of expanding it. I've seen some of the ideas floated, like if you live in your home after a certain amount of time, do your property taxes freeze, or do they, is there some sort of like automatic exemption? And any of those ideas I would certainly entertain, because I think, again, the folks that, have done the working, the living, the earning, the paying of taxes for decades and decades. And, to the point of the best quality of life for them and is for them to continue to stay in their home. And how do we help facilitate that as long as possible so that it's feasible? Certainly, I would certainly be a proponent of any of those ideas that helps make that possible, especially for our older Nebraskans in need.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Seth. We're kind of coming to the end of our meeting already. That time just always goes so fast, but with the remaining couple of minutes, do you want to talk with us about what your priorities are for serving in the legislature, or if there's any specific issues that you plan to work on or address during your time as a state senator?
Yeah, thank you. In terms of specific issues, obviously property taxes, property valuations, it's the number one thing I hear when I talk to people. I have in the next couple of weeks, I will have been to my 6,000th home in the district. I've literally talked to thousands of folks in District 21, and hopefully try to get to a few more before Election Day. But the number one issue that comes up is property taxes, and usually it's around property valuations. District 21 sits, mostly suburbs and then acreages and farms, and those kinds of properties in particular have had accelerating valuations over the last 5-10 years, and as such, the property tax burden has followed. So I think, we've got to continue to push on ideas of how to help mitigate that, while not transferring that burden in other ways. We've got to, and so I'm excited to bring ideas and to listen to ideas and like try to get folks to work together and solve the problem instead of. I think that's my number one priority, as I mentioned before, is like, let's actually work on solutions that doesn't matter which party gets credit, doesn't matter who gets credit for the solution. I'd rather just see us actually solve, and we're not going to solve it all in one fell swoop. I think most people understand that. Most people understand that it's probably going to be incremental success, but we've got to start doing incremental improvement as opposed to incremental, letting things just get worse and worse.
Thank you again for taking the time to visit with us. We wish you the best with your campaign, and thank you again for meeting with AARP today. Take care.